Welcome back, everyone. I wanted to share something that is mind-blowing to say the least, and it has to do with the current narrative about what is causing tides and how that has led to some greater understandings of the things going on with the lights that our Father placed in that firmament and how it is they really impact the world because our system is so interconnected, so wonderfully made, and the lies about it make it hard for us to fully appreciate it and actually find out why certain things are happening the way that they are. And it's with simple things, including tide changes and the Foucault pendulums, how they are altered during eclipses with what's known as the Elias effect. We've talked about that before, and I will cover it again just so you can see how I believe it's related to this. And this is by no means me figuring all this out on my own. The Father has had his hand in this operation with Creation Standard, and so this is actually some slides from our lessons with that program. I just wanted to share them with you guys so that you can investigate this alongside us and alongside them to prove all things and figure out what's really going on and step away from all the worldly lies and wisdom. And so we're going to get into some crazy things, and one of those crazy things is something that most people experience all the time, known as tide changes. And as someone who was teaching earth science many, many years ago, and I didn't really know much about it back then, I kind of got thrown into that classroom, and they were talking about the Coriolis effect and all the different things that the globe, they say, is responsible for creating, with one of those being tides. And tides rising and falling every day, I was told, was caused by the moon's gravity. In other words, that moon was lifting zillions of tons of water every single day, all the time. That's what it's doing. And as it's lifting that water, the globe is rotating through that bulge of water. And it causes two tide changes every day. It sounds simple, but once you start looking into it, it's never that simple. There's always a lot of crazy anomalies here with the globe model. And that moon lifting zillions of tons of water becomes very weird when you realize there's also a bulge of water on the other side of the globe. And this is something that isn't caused by gravity. They say it's caused by inertia. And so the moon is lifting all that water, zillions of tons, and also somehow creating a bulge by inertia on the other side of their globe. And we are rotating through those bulges. I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't go to NASA's website to verify that that's what they say is happening. And these bulges are there. And sailing in the ocean would be fairly easy, I would think. You can just stand on the edge of your continent and end up where you want to go. But this is how they say it works with tides. You are rotating through those bulges. It's not me making that up. I'll let Neil deGrasse Tyson explain that as well. Here he is.
The next thing I say may be mind-blowing to you. The tide doesn't actually come in and out. What? There is a bulge of water, two of them, on opposite sides of the Earth, caused by the sun and the moon, and Earth turns inside that bulge. When we say the water rises and falls tidally, what's happening is we are rotating into the bulge and then out of the bulge.
So the bulge is already there.
It's already there.
And all we kind of do is pass through the bulge.
Pass through, and the water gets high and it gets low. So we're stuck with language from our own perspective rather than language of what's actually happening. Simpler than
I agree with him there, rather than language of what's actually happening. So that was Neil deGrasse Tyson telling us about tides. And here is something else interesting he reveals about that bulge of water that you need to factor into this equation.
The highest spot on Earth is not Mount Everest, your book says. It's something else. What is it?
First, it's true not because my book says it, but simply because it's true. To the astrophysicist, we don't really care much about sea level. You want to be high, you're measuring your distance from the center of the Earth. So you want to find the farthest point from that center. And it turns out sea level at the equator is farther away from the center of the Earth than sea level near the poles. Because Earth, we know it spins once a day. You know, when you spin pizza dough, it kind of flattens out. It gets wider in the middle. And so Earth, throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning. And it got a little wider wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere, it's oblate. And officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. Not only that, it's slightly wider below the equator than above the equator. It's like pear-shaped.
Yeah.
That was the famous pear-shaped quote. But he's telling us about the water being much larger at the equator, higher than Mount Everest. And according to the experts, that's what they say. The world is 27 miles wider at the equator. So when you're at the equator, you don't need to get out your oxygen mask, but you are higher than Mount Everest. Mount Everest is about 5.5 miles high. This bulge is about 13.5 miles on each side. And so if you're on the equator, you're at the highest point in the world, which is crazy. People go through a lot of work getting to the top of Mount Everest. They can't hardly breathe, all these pressure changes, but never the case at the equator. And the world is rotating through these bulges. And this isn't factoring in the bulge caused by the tides. That's another addition to the bulge that's already there at the equator. And so they have us rotating through those bulges, but that's not where it gets strange. The moon isn't directly above where its gravity is. It's actually lagging behind. They call that tidal lag. And that's extremely important to remember because I believe it actually plays into what is really going on. It's not gravity, it's not this moon lifting ahead of itself. There's something more going on. And the moon is one thing. People try to blame the sun because the sun does impact tides a little bit, it seems. When there's a change from a new moon to a full moon, the tides are their greatest during both of those. And just to verify that, when you look it up on the internet, tides are higher during a new moon, tides are higher during a full moon. Even though their images show you new moons for both of those, I think their AI is just getting confused here. But that's the narrative with tides, and that's how they work according to the globe model. Now, one thing that's weird, I want you to think about this. Imagine that moon changing its location because sometimes it's up north, sometimes it's down south, and the sun and the moon, when they're moving north and south, they say it's because of the world's tilt, but you can go to timeanddate.com and change it by the week or by the month, and you'll see that the sun and moon will sometimes be traveling north and south at the same time. They'll be going in opposite directions, passing by each other. So you have two lights above you going the opposite direction. Doesn't seem possible on a globe, but that's what's happening when you look at its position throughout the year. And what's fascinating here is that on November 25th, I found this out, 2025, the moon's going to be right there over Australia. And then a year later, same day, nearly 52 degrees further north within 1 year at the same time. And so I'm thinking about that and how much water is being moved. And my question was, do these tide changes ever impact the tilt of the Earth with that moon moving far north, far south? And the answer I get on the internet is no. That bulge of water moving up and down like it does all around doesn't change the Earth's axial tilt. And remember, there's not an actual pole shoved through here. It's an imaginary pole. There's not some sort of axle. They call it Earth's axial tilt, but there's nothing holding it in place. Water sloshing around should change that motion drastically. But the internet says this is where their cover story kind of falls through, because remember what Neil deGrasse Tyson said, we're rotating through the bulge. It says here that the bulge of water created by tides doesn't significantly impact Earth's tilt because the water bulge is distributed relatively evenly across the planet, meaning the extra mass is not concentrated enough on one side to noticeably alter the Earth's axis of rotation. And this is where they have to disagree with their own wisdom. They say essentially the water bulges move with the Earth as it rotates. So Neil deGrasse Tyson telling us we're rotating through the bulge. Google says, no, it doesn't impact our tilt because the water bulges move with the Earth as it rotates, not independently affecting its tilt. And so, weird lies on top of lies, trying to cover for why the axial tilt isn't changing given all that water sloshing around up and down, moving around the world that's supposedly spinning within those bulges when there's no change in tilt. You can look at the North Pole star and tell that. That would be very telling. There's got to be something in place there. If the world were a globe, there would have to be some sort of force or some sort of actual stick holding it in place. It would not be able to maintain that position rotating through the vacuum chamber of space. And so that's where there's some oddities. And where it gets weird is when you look at the maps that show you how many tide changes there are on each shoreline in the world. Should be 2 a day in most places. But what we see, that's not the case. The red shorelines, those are your 2 tide changes every single day. But when you have a blue line, it could be a mix of 1 or 2. A yellow line just means there's 1. And so the gravity seems to be selective. That bulge of water selecting where it wants to operate like it should on the globe. And then in other places, it doesn't operate that way. So if you're on the East Coast, you get that selective moon gravity. When you're on the West Coast, not so. And so it just depends. Some continents have a mix all up and down. You can see here South America, East Coast, yes, there's 2. West Coast, actually, there's 2 here. But keep going north, it changes. Just depends on where you're at. So it's very selective gravity. I mean, just look at Australia here. It's a unique little rainbow of colors. Got to be really cool to witness that. Walking down the street and seeing different tides would be kind of cool. And then you look at tidal amplitude maps. This is something I saw Austin Whitsitt talking about a long time ago, and I pulled it up and I was like, wow, this does not match the globe model. Seems to be more dramatic up north for whatever reason, but that is your tidal amplitude map showing you the places where they have the most tide changes. And the north, again, seems to be more impacted. They say it's not, but definitely looks that way. And so now we're going to look at what I believe is really causing the tides to change on the biblical earth. And it's going to make a lot more sense because it's something you can prove in the lab, like many other aspects of biblical cosmology. And instead of gravity, it has to do with magnetism. But before I get into that, I want to give you a lesson that I wished I would have learned because a lot of things would have made more sense if I'd have known this. Essentially, you have everything in the world being impacted by magnets. When I was growing up, it was either A, it was magnetic, or B, it wasn't. And that's how simple it was. However, there's actual properties of everything in creation that allow them to be impacted by magnetic powers. And so you have everything, all life, everything being impacted by magnets. You can either be diamagnetic, meaning you're repelling the magnet, or paramagnetic, and you could look, just imagine the arrows are pointing towards the magnet. That means it's being drawn towards it, but it's a very weak pull here when it's paramagnetic, not a strong pull here or attraction. Then you have ferromagnetic. Notice the arrows are getting larger and darker. This is your strong force. Something like iron would be ferromagnetic. Then you have something very similar, ferromagnetic, which really starts to not make sense to me because you have that strong pull towards the magnet, and then you also have a weaker force pulling away from the magnet, anti-parallel, and they do not cancel, it says. And then you have the anti-ferromagnetic, where it's got a strong push and pull, which is really confusing. These are anti-parallel as well. And so you have all these different types of magnetism, and you also have things that can impact water. Things like static electricity can impact water. It can bend the water. It can curve the water. In my original theory, I thought that the moon was doing something similar to a balloon when you charge it up and put it next to the water. I thought that could have been the case. Now, I don't believe that's so because that water was being lifted and actually pulled towards the balloon. So it makes a lot of sense. However, I think it has to do with magnetism because water is diamagnetic, and that means water is repelling the magnet, or the water is being also repelled or pushed away by the magnetic force itself. And so, if that's the case, if water is being repelled by a magnet, we should see certain things, and we should be able to test this out. People have. They've done lots of tests with magnets and water. So if you get a really strong magnet, you can actually make curved water. And so, guys, I hate to tell you, here's some curved water. There it is right there. On a flat surface, or should be what would be a flat surface of water, it's curving because of the diamagnetic properties of water. And when you add more water, and that surface tension breaks and it collapses right here, you can see there's indentations caused by this ring magnet. And when you actually take a powerful magnet and push down on the water from above without actually touching it, just using that magnetic force, you can see the water curves. It goes concave. So you have water now curving the opposite direction. I'm going to mute this. This man has a powerful, powerful magnet. He has some graph paper in the background so you can see the lines reflected onto the water. Watch what happens when he pushes the magnet downward. The water is curving. It's becoming concave. It's creating two bulges. I repeat, two bulges of water here. Just like with the tide changes and that moon being in motion, you would have two bulges of water, and there would be a tidal lag. In other words, the moon would not be directly over the highest part of the crest of that bulge. It would be following behind it. It would be leaving a trail, kind of like a boat when it's moving in the water, how it pushes the water forward. It's got that other crest behind it, that wake. This is what I believe is happening. And when I started looking further into this, I started coming across some unique videos. People have done things before where they are moving water with magnets, and that's what had my wheels turning in the first place, thinking it was some sort of magnetic property, because I've seen videos like this, of course, Action Labs here, moving water with a magnet. But what really got me was when he put a block of wood on here. I'd never seen anybody do this. Put a block of wood and said everything is impacted by a magnet. And so, thanks to him and the Father for leading me this direction, I started realizing there's some unique properties of life. They're magnetic. This world also is something that has magnetic properties built into it. That's why we can navigate with a compass and see that magnetic field, because a compass is a magnometer. It's detecting a change in a magnetic field. And so you can do really cool things with strong magnets. But what I came across that I think is interesting, it may show us how they're doing some of the things when they're faking space, has to do with a floating frog. Yes, a frog was able to float with a magnet, but listen to what the scientist says who makes this frog float, because their experiments are amazing. This frog has not swallowed any type of ferromagnetic objects, iron or anything like that. It's just a regular frog. And check this out. Here's the frog swimming around before thrown in there. There it is. Leave it. I'm gonna mute this. Magnetic levitation right there. This frog is floating around, being levitated by magnets. The frog is diamagnetic. So you have all these forces around it. That's why it's in this cylinder shape. Same thing with this grasshopper. Its legs are a little longer, so it's banging into the sides, but it's levitating. And I want you to hear what the scientist says after he does this.
No problem with putting a man, to force a man by this magnetic levitation to fly in the air. So technically, we can do it with you without any problems.
Technically, we could levitate a person without any problems. Why wasn't I told about this? How come this is something I'm finding out on a YouTube video? People always say, oh yeah, your research is just on YouTube. Well, I'm finding real scientists doing real experiments that validate a lot of the things that we've all been investigating. Things like the surface of water. Does it curve? How do tides change? Is gravity real? All these things we're investigating. I believe there's always a twist on the truth with the worldly wisdom. And so there is a force. I believe that force is not gravity. I believe it's magnetism, and it's things that we can see in the lab. And we don't just see it with water. We talked about Mr. Elias, the guy who was using his pendulum to set up a test to where he would observe the changes during a solar eclipse. And what really shocked a lot of people was his data. This guy did this a couple times, I believe. Maurice Elias, he's not just some nobody. He was a Nobel Prize winner in economics, but he was able to witness a change during an eclipse, which shouldn't have happened on the globe, but the pendulum changed from its standard 15 degrees an hour rotation to 13.5 degrees within the span of 14 minutes. That's a major jump. That's nothing to just toss out as well. That was just the wind blowing that day. People started doing this indoors, underground, replicating the exact same change in phenomena. So this right here shows us there's something at work. And originally I thought it couldn't be magnetism because they started using objects that weren't impacted by magnets or that weren't ferromagnetic. And this was before I realized everything was impacted by magnets. So I thought, well, they used something that wasn't ferromagnetic, so let's throw that out. No, this stuff is happening for a reason. Our Father put those lights in the firmament for signs and appointed times. The things they do are different than what we're being told, And we're starting to see that, and it's powerful. So I wanted to share this because we do have some eclipses coming up very soon. This month we have two in March. One is a lunar eclipse on the 13th through the 14th, depending on where you're at. The other is a partial solar eclipse on March 29th. I'll put these links in the description so you guys can find them. But timeanddate.com shows you when they are going to happen. You can do your own pendulum experiments, take things that measure changes in a magnetic field. There's different ways to do that, and I'm hoping somebody will be an expert in that field and be able to detect these changes. And I believe it's something we can start looking out for and witnessing, measuring, proving that it's real, because NASA already tells us that there's a magnetic aspect to the moon. I didn't know that. But when you look at the moon, I mean, just look at it during a solar eclipse. Look at that field around it, and then compare that to a magnet with iron shavings around it. It looks nearly identical. There's something magnetic going on, I believe. And our world itself shows us there's something strange with our magnetic fields. Even the magnetic South Pole. It's not even on the continent of Antarctica. It's in the water. It should be directly in the center. It's not. That magnetic field we have, they say, is generated by magma rotating within the world. That can't be. Once you superheat something, it loses its magnetic powers. And so that's probably why they invented the rotating magma narrative, because people realized you can't get a magnet to work once it gets heated up, quits working. So now, oh well, save it. Let's save the day with rotating magma. That's what they've done. And so magnetism causing tides, I believe, and it's also most likely what's causing the rotations of storms in the north, because a North Pole magnet will cause water to swirl in a counterclockwise direction, and a South Pole magnet will cause it to rotate in a clockwise direction. Imagine that. Water storms made out of? They're made out of water. And so check this out. Here's a scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, I believe, showing us what that looks like. She's using a South Pole magnet here.
And we can see everything begin to swirl. Currently, the South Pole is aimed down.
South Pole aimed down.
You can see everything swirling one way. And now we'll bring in the North Pole. And this is when you really see the water start to become a mess. But we can see everything now swirling the other way.
How cool is that? Magnets impacting water should be standard science class information. I was never told about this. Maybe I just didn't get the best education, but I spent a lot of time and a lot of money on it to not find out about this stuff until years later, investigating biblical cosmology. And it's fascinating because the truth is provable way more way more so than what we've been taught about gravity and rotating through the giant bulges of water that are larger than Mount Everest. So this stuff starting to make sense. And again, I'm not making this up about the magnetic field. A lot of people have verified this. Even NASA says that the moon has a very weak magnetic field. I don't think it's very weak. I think it's very strong. But that light is far enough away, it's not going to be sucking everything up, you know. It can push down on the water and change the levels and change the tides. It is moving a lot of water, but things mostly are diamagnetic. Now, there may be some way to get crafts up there and have them hijack those properties of what's above us. That might be what they're doing, getting things up there somehow. And maybe, just maybe, getting that close to something so powerfully magnetic could cause some sort of levitation. I don't know. I don't know what it would do. But I do know that when they are supposedly flying around and levitating inside of a little tin can here, it's always shaped like a cylinder. You'd have those magnets all around if they were inside of some sort of lab underground, let's say in Texas, and they were replicating that technology. They could make people levitate. It's probably why their hair stands still. You ever noticed everybody says it's hairspray? What if it's because their hair is diamagnetic and it's all being pushed together? That's why it's not moving around and flowing like it does in the zero-G planes. May not be hairspray and some weird CGI type of thing. It might actually just be they're using diamagnetic levitation. And that's why they look like they're squished and constipated half the time. So I don't know. These are just theories I'm throwing out there for you guys to investigate. I think this stuff, I mean, like I keep saying, is extremely fascinating, very telling, and I believe that even eclipses, we can measure this stuff. That's why I want you guys to know the dates. You can check this stuff out. You can do a time lapse of your compass. Google tells us that your compass needle can experience a slight movement during a solar eclipse. Imagine that. Mr. Elias experienced the pendulum changing. Our compass can experience the needle moving. And so I forgot about this. I'm glad I clicked on this slide here. Lots of things you could be doing to measure these changes. I just wanted to share this. I don't have a whole lot of time, so I wanted to be quick. But other things with the moon will start making more sense. I want to add a couple more things. Remember how moonlight is colder than the shade? Guess what? Magnets increase their strength when they get colder. So think about the intelligent design of our moon. Our Father knew what he was doing, and he made that lesser light to rule the night and do the things that it does. Not only does moonlight have that colder aspect, moonlight actually impacts what's going on inside the trees. They have studied how sap moves within the trees, and the moon phases, new moon phases and full moon phases, will impact how much the sap and stuff is moving around inside the trees, similar to the tide changes. I think that's another little nail in the coffin there for the gravity narrative. This stuff makes a lot more sense if you could imagine a luminary being held up by the firmament. It doesn't have to worry about being pulled down into the water or pushed away into deep space. It can just use those intelligently designed magnetic properties to push down on the water, causing two tidal bulges, and actually have a tidal lag that makes a lot more sense than the globe version of the tidal lag. And I'm not making fun of anyone that believes it. I used to believe this stuff. I just did not realize there were so many different narratives put in place for all the things that don't add up. Things like tidal lag, things like the bulge of water being larger than Mount Everest, but not impacting our axial tilt. So we then have to say that we're rotating with the water, not through the water now. So there's all these different things, and it's starting to make sense why their lies are catching up to them, because our world is immovable. That's something that is provable. And not only that, imagine when I show you the illustrations, they always have the moon right there next to the earth. You got to realize on their scale, this little rock right here would be what's lifting zillions of tons of water on the ball over here on the left, causing the tides, those two bulges, a bulge on the other side as well. Don't forget about that one. And so we'd be rotating through it on this scale. If you're zoomed way out, I think it's about 30 Earth distances away, 250,000 miles away, that little rock causing our tides. What makes more sense? That causing our tides, lifting zillions of tons of water up into the air a few feet, twice a day in some places. Some places once a day, some places like not at all. Does that make sense? Or the magnetic properties of the moon pushing down on the water, causing two tidal bulges? I think I'm going to go with the magnetic moon theory. It makes a lot more sense to me. So that's all I really wanted to share. There's so much more. I could talk for hours about this, and I may some point when we finish up here with Creation Standard. We should finish at the end of May, and then I'll be able to go live a lot more. I have this mission before us. It's a lot of work. It's the most work I've ever done in my life. It'll wear you out sometimes, but it's a blessing, and the Father is giving us a lot of insight into His intelligent design, and it's just something that I wouldn't have came to on my own if it wasn't for His blessing and His hand in this. And so I thank all of you who have helped support Creation Standard, and those of you who do so in the future or right now. It is a definite needed blessing because I have a lot of work to do this summer, and I'm not going to be getting a paycheck. And so I thank you for helping us out so that we can just work and focus on that. And when my wife has the baby in July, I'm not having to really panic because we're going to start classes soon after, and I'm going to be single-handed without her. And so I thank you guys for your help. It's been a major blessing, and we will see you guys next time.